welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you live from London and also on Zoom. So welcome everybody who's joining us on Zoom. You can also see some of us here in the library and at our London venue, and well, welcome, there you are. So this webinar, Cara, would you be able to hold that just for seconds? Is brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on our website, womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by over 37,000 people from 160 countries and is supported by 517 organizations from all over the world. We have many volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent, engaged in defending women's rights. Do join us. You can become a member or a volunteer or a donor or all of those. So today we're talking about where WDI is and what would success look like. Are we going to what does WDI want to be doing in the next few years? What would a success for Women's Declaration International be like? We've got Sheila Jeffries, Amparo Domingo, Vaishnavi Sundar, Cara Dansky, and me, Brew, and we'll each give a sort of around a 10-minute talk of what we think, and then we're going to have a discussion. So our first speaker about what would success look like for WDI is Sheila Jeffries, and over to you, Sheila.
It's good to have reached a point, I think, where we can talk about what success would look like, because in fact, this is a point at which we are winning. This is why we can now talk about what would success look like. And I'm really going to talk about, although there are many issues covered in the declaration, I'm going to talk about gender identity politics and the defeat of gender identity politics today. Now, considerable advances, of course, are being made, and we're all aware of that, and we're watching it all happen in real time in relation to several aspects of what the declaration is about. For instance, opposition to the transgendering of children and young women is progressing fast in Europe, many states of the US, in the UK and in Australia. Governments are closing down programs to mutilate children, and young women are suing the doctors who mutilated them. There's considerable success in sport too. Sports bodies are changing their policies to keep men out of women's sport, and progress is being made too in getting men out of women's prisons. So all of this is happening. The problem is that this is all piecemeal progress. And the overall problem, which is the recognition in law that men can be women, continues to exist in many countries. And whilst this is the case, we will have to continuously, endlessly fight battles against these men intruding into all aspects of women's lives and causing huge problems. And we'll have to continue doing that piecemeal in all countries. So these men are relentless, and they're constantly finding new ways to harass us, harm our rights and opportunities, and destroy the quality of our lives. This means that we need to both continue to prevent implementation of legislation that recognizes men as women, or makes such recognition easier than it already is, as in self-ID legislation, and conversion therapy legislation, which outlaws any attempt by therapists to prevent or delay treatment, which will mutilate children or adults, is still a potent threat, because it will prevent therapists from helping those who've been sucked into pursuing mutilation. And it is still being promoted in many countries, including in the UK right now. So we need to anticipate and keep a sharp eye on any legislation that concerns gender identity that is proposed, and oppose it immediately and thoroughly. But we also need to campaign for the repeal of all legislation that exists to enable a recognition of men as women, and examine all legislation on equality and women's rights that has mention of female impersonators, and remove them by taking out the language of men's sexual fantasies. Now, earlier today, one of our speakers said she thought it probably wouldn't be possible to repeal self-ID legislation, for instance, or recognition of these men in the law as women. I don't know if that's true, and that's maybe something that we can talk about and talk about how it might be done, how we would campaign on that, because I do think that is a next stage and where we need to go. And once the laws of a country have been pruned and changed to eliminate gender identity, it is still the case, however, that transvestites will appear on TV programs and be significant in popular woman-hating culture. This was the case before the word transgender or gender identity were invented, after all. Now that we know what this social affirmation leads to, however, it is clear that there needs to be a wholesale cultural change that will make it unthinkable for a man to imitate women, to perform woman face anywhere at all. I don't know that we will have laws to make this impossible, but the way forward is to look at the way, I think, in which blackface, which shares so many features with woman face, was made socially unacceptable. We need to make it socially unacceptable for any man in any public space to imitate a woman. Blackface is so unacceptable that the women's magazine Good Housekeeping has a definition of blackface and an explanation of why it is racist. There are school programs made for the BBC which explain this to children. This is a level of success that we need to aim for. Blackface has a history, as womanface does. In a TV program in July, the black actor David Harewood looked at the history of blackface and talked about how this practice negatively affected him as a black child in the UK. Harewood is a descendant of slaves that worked on plantations owned by the Harewood family, and the tradition was to call slaves after their owners. So he has the name Harewood, as married women are called after their owners, which are their husbands, and very frequently that extraordinary practice does go on. There are women probably in this room who have experienced the obliteration of their personhood and having to take the names of their owners. Now, Harewood explains that blackface, which he calls minstrelsy, originated in 1830s US when a white man called Thomas T. Rice invented the character Jim Crow to show that black people were inferior. Rice explained that this was part of the campaign to prevent the abolition of slavery. He wanted to show the inferiority, which meant that black people should remain slaves. He came to London in 1836 to spread the message of black people as happy-go-lucky simpletons, as he calls it. And from that point onwards, there was an epidemic of minstrel groups in which white men in dress-up performed, singing and dancing, about how wonderful slavery was. They portrayed life on slave plantations as delightful. So this is, I think, reasonably, it has similarities, of course, with drag, in which men show the terrible sexualized dressing up that women have to do as something delightful. By the 1890s in the UK, minstrel groups were commonly performing in the streets of London, and shockingly, a black and white minstrel show was put on the BBC TV channel in 1958 and not taken off until 1978. I can remember seeing it myself when I was young. It was watched at its peak by 20 million people. In the early and mid 20th century, blackface characters were commonplace in movies and TV shows, with Bing Crosby, Fred Astaire, and Judy Garland all blacking up in their performances. Now these shows are gathering dust in archives, or they have been changed to edit out blackface sections because blackface is now understood to be racist. And indeed, words that are extremely derogatory of women, it would, I can't imagine them being used in a way that would show just how bad things were, as that song did. But we need to be ambitious. There was a campaign against blackface by the Campaign Against Racial Discrimination, an organization which only existed from 64 to 67. And a similar campaign could be mounted over woman face on TV. Harewood talks of seeing the black and white minstrels in the 60s and 70s when he was growing up, and how this had a negative effect on him as a little black boy. Watching drag on TV is likely to have a negative effect on all little girls as they see their inferior status mocked for fun and sexual excitement. Little girls, of course, have a bigger problem, which is that women wearing similar costumes and sexualized in the way that men doing drag are everywhere in the culture. The newsreaders wear hugely crippling high-heeled shoes, for instance. For girls, the problem of being humiliated and degraded in the culture they inhabit through seeing effeminized and sexualized women is made worse by seeing men mocking the degradation of women for their own sexual kicks. It's a double whammy. It worries me that I see many women saying that they have no problem with what men wear, just so long as they do not claim to be women. The minstrels did not claim to be black, but their performances were devastating for black children nevertheless. I hear some women say that even if drag is a problem, no one could object to pantomime dames, who in this country are men dressed as women who traditionally play significant roles in Christmas entertainment. I am sure there will be some feminists who think that the TV series Mrs. Brown's Boys is okay. That is on British TV, on the BBC. This show, which started as a radio comedy in Ireland in 1992, it's hugely famous now and seen as sort of traditional culture. It's now popular worldwide. A man called, I have never seen it because I cannot make myself see it. So I'm telling you what's in it from having read about it. I cannot watch these things. A man called Brendan O'Carroll dresses up as an old woman. He's now 68. He was obviously younger when it started. Woman place is a problem in and of itself, regardless of the what the practitioners think about what they're doing. A comedy in which a white man blacks up would not be acceptable on the TV today. Women, however, do not have the status of black men, being not fully human. They also cannot readily be degraded, since being degraded is our ordinary condition and seen as thoroughly positive for women. Brendan O'Neill knows that what he does relates to drag, though. In the 2023 series this year, he puts in a tribute to two of what he calls drag entertainers who have died this year, Paul O'Grady and Dame Edna Everage. The question then is how to embark on campaigning against womanface so that it becomes as unacceptable as blackface. When that happens and includes all forms of womanface, drag, and heterosexual male transvestism, and whatever the men think they're doing, then I think we'll be able to claim considerable success. The practice of men impersonating women needs to be extirpated from the culture. We need to reach a position where any appearance or suggestion of female impersonation is booed, and any man who makes the mistake of doing such an impersonation loses face and is seen to have committed a serious social mistake. But there is another level of success to which we might then aspire, which is to campaign to abolish gender. When women no longer suffer from the harmful cultural practice that signify gender, then transvestites will no longer be attracted to identifying as women. The attraction of womanhood to these men is that it represents a degraded and inferior position, and therefore holds a masochistic attraction. High-heeled shoes signify pain, so they are good. Trainers and any other shoes that are fully comfortable and suitable for running, as men's shoes are not attractive to these men. It will take some time to reach this stage, where women do not wear the clothing of subordination, but it is something to aim for, and it will make womanface impossible to imagine. Thank you.
So our next speaker on this panel today, and we're going to aim to have a discussion afterwards, is Amparo Domingo. So over to you.
The question from WDI's point of view, what would success look like? I have to say that I like this question very much. I think it's very clever, and I think it's very important. It's a very important question for every organization because it forces them to review their goals, set a roadmap of tasks and actions to achieve those goals, and then find a way of measuring their achievements to check whether the milestones accomplished are in line with the actual goals of the organization. Putting it in very simple words, what we're asking ourselves now is first, who are we? And once that is clear, what do we really want to achieve? So let's start by reviewing who we are. That is very easy. It's actually written in our main website at the About section. And I'm reading now from the webpage, womensdeclaration.com. It says, Women's Declaration International, WDI, is a group of volunteer women from across the globe dedicated to protecting women's sex-based rights. Our volunteers include academics, writers, organizers, activists, and health practitioners, and aim to represent the total breadth of the human female experience. The Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights was created by the founders of WDI to build international sisterhood and to urge nations to maintain language protecting women and girls on the basis of sex rather than gender or gender identity. You can read our facts here. And also it says that we are a female-only group and men are invited to support the cause by donating. So far, that's what is written on the website. And all the work is done already. Everything is explained, so we might end this panel here. So in those two paragraphs, we not only described ourselves, what we also did state our goals very clearly. We said that WDDR is dedicated to protecting women's sex-based rights, which is the reason why, accordingly, we have a document called Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights that was created. And according to our own description, we have two goals. One is to build international sisterhood. Second, to urge nations to maintain language protecting women and girls on the basis of sex rather than gender or gender identity. So from this very own point of view, which is different from other feminist organizations that could be working in other very important areas, like, for instance, abolition of prostitution or abolition of surrogacy, from this very point of view, as I said, what would success look like? And just a little note that, in my opinion, success is a word that sometimes can be used with modifiers because it can have different levels of fulfillment. I'm saying this because I think we have already experienced some success as an organization that has an interest in influencing language. Sheila Jeffries pointed out some days ago at the launch of WDI book, Women's Rights, Gender Wrongs, that the expression sex-based rights was unheard of before the launch of the declaration. But now it's becoming increasingly popular. And in fact, it's becoming the mainstream expression in many countries for expressing the mindset from which people are able to oppose gender identity ideology. It would be better if we were rightfully acknowledged as the source of the expression, but even if people don't know where it comes from, it is a success to have placed that concept in the ordinary language of the general population. As you all know, everyone here knows, the declaration is open for signatures from people from all over the world, but you must have noticed that collected signatures was not mentioned in the about description I read before. I myself hadn't noticed that before preparing for this panel, but I haven't asked the board of directors about it. But I think that's because the declaration was created not just as a manifesto for people to agree with, but as a legal antidote to the poisonous Yogyakarta principles that were being used by governments all over the world for creating legislation that erased women as a legal category based on the reality of sex. The declaration is a collection of principles already set on international human rights law, and therefore it's a reminder of the bare minimum content that any legislation impacting women's rights must comply with. From this reference point, success for us would be placing our Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights as the standard legal template in every country for modifying the current legislation that has already been passed based on the infamous Yogyakarta principles, or also the template for the creation of any new piece of legislation impacting women that might be drafted from now on. That is, success from this point of view would be the implementation of policies all over the world that would apply what is written in the articles of the declaration. that the rights of women are based upon the category of sex, that the nature of motherhood is an exclusive female status, that women and girls have rights to physical and reproductive integrity, to freedom of opinion and expression, to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, which includes, of course, rights of women and of course, including lesbians, to meet in single-sex spaces, rights to political participation on the basis of sex, and to the same opportunities as men to participate actively in sports and physical education, and that there is a need for the elimination of violence against women and for the protection of the rights of the child. That said, it doesn't mean that gathering signatures is not important. It is important for many different reasons. One of the most important, in my opinion, being that in order to be a member of our organization, women have to sign it. That is, they have to publicly declare that they adhere to its principles. Everything we do must be aligned to it and cannot contradict it. That is extremely important to keep us on track and not deviate us from our path. But also, for non-members of the declaration, it is very important because it helps people understand the key points of our fight while we spread the word about what's happening in many countries with the erasure of the female sex from legislation. What I mean is that we have to be very aware that the declaration is a means to an end, not the end in itself. We don't want to be popular. We want to change legislation, and we want to change it in a very specific and concrete way. That is the end goal, and that must be the target to work for and the measure of our success. I will conclude by coming back to the about text reference before, where there has also been a mention of building international sisterhood. About that, I think it's fair to say that we have been very successful. And this meeting itself attests that with women from different countries coming from 3 continents, as this panel also show you. We are already a true international network of women working together in pursuit of the same goal. Our reach is so wide, it goes from New Zealand to Canada or from Japan to Chile. So we can claim without bragging that we actually are a global organization. Another proof of this sisterhood is the already mentioned book, Women's Rights, Gender Wrongs, where not only there are 38 country reports, but also the book itself is a collective effort of over 100 women, as Sally Wainwright told us, which is really amazing. WDR, I think it's the first of its kind, a true grassroots radical feminist organization with members, activists, and donors from all over the world. And that is creating and fostering channels of communication among us. We know who we are and how to find us, and that is a great success in itself. Things change when women meet to work collectively to advance our rights. We have just started. My bit was very, very simple because I consider myself an activist. So it's what do we do? We want to change legislation. We have to lobby for the change of the legislation, and we have that tool that is the declaration. So the situation in Spain is bittersweet, as Vaishnavi was saying, because when people tell me that we're doing right because they see that we are fighting hard, I'm not happy with the results because we failed in the sense that we have the law passed. They cheated. They did all kind of tricks, so we would have had a better chance had they not been playing dirty in that sense. It wasn't a fair fight, but even that, it's not consolation. It's not. I mean, we lost that, but I don't think that we lost the war. That was a battle. We're still here, and there's a sisterhood that really is a sort of power bank. I was, as Vaishnavi and many people know, that I was completely desperate when I met Sheila that day. I don't know whether she remembers. I felt that I was also on my own, that no one was doing those. No one was doing anything in my country. I knew that women in the UK, in the US, were doing other things, but no one was doing that. So it's this idea of belonging to a group, as Vaishnavi said, really also helped me a lot in terms of a moral, because when you're on your own, it's very difficult to address the situation, which is so huge. It's a sort of mythological monster, or this is the kind of story that the fairy tales are made of, the big monster that comes to eat children up. So this sisterhood is what really fits us. It prevents us from quitting when moral is low. So even if we are in a bad place, remembering that we are in this together, and the more we work, the more sister will come. It's also a good way of addressing it.
We're going to now hear from Dansky.
We're here to talk today about what WDI can be doing in the fight to protect the sex-based rights of women and girls and what success might look like. I really think that radical feminists bring such an important voice to the entire conversation about stopping the abolition of sex. In the US, it is mostly only conservatives who are permitted to speak on the topic at all in the mainstream media, though, as many of you know, some radical feminists have been able to speak in conservative media as well. The mainstream media will not touch the topic or platform radical feminists who bring a leftist critique of gender identity to the conversation. But at some point, that has to break. Polling overwhelmingly shows that Americans across the political spectrum are with us. Everyone understands that men aren't women and that children shouldn't be sterilized. But, and I think this is crucial, so many left-leaning Americans are afraid to speak out because they think they'll be painted as conservatives, and they don't want to be associated with conservatives. I think this is a completely understandable concern, but it's wrong. If left-leaning Americans could hear from radical feminists, they would completely understand where we're coming from, and they would totally support what we're doing. It's partly with that in mind that I wrote my new book, to be published in the next couple of weeks, The Reckoning: How the Democrats and the Left Betrayed Women and Girls. I'm just going to read the text that will appear on the back cover. In The Reckoning, Dansky, a radical feminist and lifelong Democrat, exposes the invasion by men into female-only spaces, the harming of children, and the silencing, punishment, cancellation, and even violence against women who speak out. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party, which claims to represent the interests of women, ignores the problem, while its allies in the organized left and mainstream media paint all opposition to the trans agenda as right-wing. But radical feminists are not right-wing. They are leftists who know that sex is real and are not afraid to demand women's hard-won rights to safe spaces and privacy. The Democrat left-wing establishment knows all the ways in which gender identity harms women and girls, and plenty of boys. Yet they are sacrificing women and children to a vicious, profit-driven industry that allows men to invade women's spaces in sports, denies that sex is real, and slices up children's bodies. Now the Democrats are facing a reckoning. Detransitioners are starting to speak out, clinicians are blowing the whistle, and women and girls, including many lesbians, have had it. Even now, the tide of common sense and decency is starting to turn in other countries that have banned harmful medical and surgical procedures for underage children, and a handful of Democrats are bucking the trend at the state level. Elected Democrats will later claim that they didn't know, that they couldn't have known, that the science has changed. But they knew. They've known all along. This book provides the evidence. So I don't want to say too much more about the book until it's published, but I do want to say that I talk a lot about WDI in it, and there's an entire chapter devoted to radical feminist organizing and activism in this area. So I look forward to it. And I shared it here because I hope WDI women will consider doing something similar in their countries. The main point is this: it is radical feminists, not conservatives, who can speak to voters on the political left all over the world, and we need to use our voices. So to that end, I want to say a word about anonymity, and I know this is going to be controversial. I know there are people on our side who absolutely cannot speak out using their own voices. These include especially the parents of minor children who are confused about their sex and trans widows, one of whom we heard from this morning. Both groups of people have completely legitimate privacy concerns. But for the rest of us, the tide is turning, and those who have remained anonymous are quickly going to find out that it is in fact safe to speak out. People, at least in America, are starting to talk amongst themselves about how insane sex denialism is. I want to encourage everyone who is even a little bit able to speak out using their own name to please start doing it. Our side is the popular one, and as more and more WDI women speak out, the more awareness we'll bring to our organization and the more cover we'll give to others on the political left who share our concerns to speak out as well. I recently attended the annual conference of the American Association of Pediatrics, which has been pushing child transition, not to participate in the conference itself, but to chat with some people who were there from the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. That group was founded to address problems of race in the US, but it has been increasingly speaking out about matters of sex and gender. With them that day were several detransitioners and Jamie Reed, a clinical worker who blew the whistle on the gender clinic she once worked at, prompting a massive conversation in the US about the child sterilization that takes place at these clinics. All these detransitioners and Jamie tell me that they are so glad they decided to speak out. Clinician after clinician approached the table. I watched as the detransitioners told their stories, and I watched as Jamie explained to clinicians that just a few years ago, she was totally on side with child transition, but what she saw at the clinic horrified her. The vast majority of these clinicians were open, curious, and sympathetic. I'm serious when I say the tide is turning. I want to end with a quick story about what a WDI woman in the US recently did and encourage others to use it as inspiration for what they might do in their own areas all over the world. Carol Donzero is a second wave radical feminist and WDI USA volunteer who lives in the Seattle area. Last month, she spearheaded an effort to demand that the Seattle School District get so-called gender identity out of the school curriculum. Here's what she said at a school board meeting. My name is Carol Donzero, and I am here to deliver a demand for action to stop the promotion of gender identity ideology in Seattle schools. Those fighting the imposition of that ideology on children, including those presenting this demand, come from across the political spectrum. There are plenty of left-wingers like me. It is not okay to present children with blatantly false information about biology. There is nothing acceptable about telling them that some people are born in the wrong body, sex has nothing to do with anatomy, and men give birth. It is not okay to promote sexist stereotypes, undercut safeguarding, and encourage children to dissociate from their bodies. We are outraged that Seattle schools force children to embrace gender identity's mystical mantras and absurd new meanings for key words. We are outraged that it forces them to disregard the evidence of their own eyes, engage in compelled speech, and forfeit their rights to sex-based privacy and female-only sports. We are appalled that via misguided affirmation-only policies, teachers are locking vulnerable children into disassociation from their bodies, leading skyrocketing numbers to medicalization. Multiple systematic reviews have firmly established that pediatric sex change is not evidence-based. There is no there regarding supposed mental health benefits, but the harm to children is well established and massive. Seattle schools are complicit in one of the most horrific medical scandals of all time. I've prepared packets for each of you that contain the demand for action, an appendix that lays out what's been being taught, and an appendix that provides documentation for everything we say. The promotion of gender identity ideology in Seattle schools, the imposition of this belief system on Seattle's children, is hurting enrollment and creates major liability. The school board needs to act immediately because of these realities, but more importantly, because children deserve better. Gender ideology is anti-science, child harming, civil rights destroying, homophobia elevating deception. It is more than time to stop promoting it in our schools. So I share that because I really think it's a good example of how strong the radical feminist opposition to gender identity can be. We articulate our concerns with absolute clarity and absolute force. Carol and her team then submitted voluminous materials containing many references to the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. All of this material can be found on our website, which is www.womensdeclarationusa.com. If signatory after signatory brought this kind of message to their school boards and to elected officials, we would start making some serious headway. We know that schools today are incubators of gender identity ideology. If WDI can bring radical feminist opposition to that, it will be hard for the mainstream media to continue to ignore us forever. At some point, the dam has to break. My hope is that WDI will be a major part of making that happen. Thank you. In college, I really spent a lot of time studying core radical feminist texts, and I kept those books on my bookshelf, and my career went in a different direction. And then in 2017, when I woke up to this issue, it was because a radical feminist told me what was going on with gender identity. And I immediately got it. And that inspired me to pull down all those old radical feminist texts from my bookshelf and reread them. I got my Marilyn Fry, I got down my Mary Daly, my Catherine McKinnon, who Sheila and I are going to be talking about in an upcoming Radical Feminist Perspectives. And so it really, was inspiring me to do exactly what Joe said, which is we're not just going back to 2015. We're going to take this on a massive trajectory, and they're going to rue the day they came after us. And sort of on that note as well, there's a woman in the States named Elizabeth who spent some time thinking that she was trans and desisted from it. And it was the TERFs who she found. And so it was through that experience that she also found core radical feminism. And so she doesn't want to just go back to 2015 either. So I think it's really true. We're just going to take this far ahead. And then just real quick on what Joe said about the word TERF being a portal. So here's just a quick story. One day I was at a conference in 2018, and the conference was mostly political conservatives, parents who had children who were questioning their sex, doctors who were trying to push back against the medicalization of children, and me. And during the conference, I was sitting with some of the conference attendees, and we were just chatting. And I wasn't using that term to describe myself at the time because I thought it was a slur. And there's a woman across the table from me, and I don't want to say her name, but I would sort of characterize her as a moderate to conservative journalist. And she asked me who I was, and I introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, you're a TERF." And I wasn't quite sure how to respond because I wasn't using the term at the time, but I sort of said, "Well, yeah, basically." And she looked me right in the eye and she said, "It's the TERFs who are going to save us all." And I think there's really something to that. So the final chapter of my book, which is about us, it's about radical feminists, it's about WDI. The book talks a lot about Wolf as well, which I was very involved in before WDI. It starts with that story. And I think there's really a lot of merit to that, which is why they constantly shut us up and ignore us and why we have to keep talking.
So I'm going to now go to our fourth speaker, Vaishnavi Sundar.
I'm sorry, but I might have to paint a slightly grim picture for what is happening back home. While it warms my heart so much to see the strides that women across the world have achieved through the declaration and by forming communities via WDI and getting down on the streets, performing direct actions and things like that, it feels as though we haven't reached the active resistance part back in India. The challenges are plenty, starting with the language. It is very hard to organize in a country where we speak more than 100 languages and so many more dialects that I myself cannot understand my sister who is living in the neighboring state, unless she speaks in English, which the population, as you can imagine, is very, very limited. Therefore, even though we are the largest country in terms of population in the world, we have fewer than 500 signatories of the declaration. This is despite active promotion of the declaration on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., by actively me talking about the dangers of it and the importance of a document like the declaration and the importance of radical feminist perspective in achieving women's sex-based rights. We haven't gone past 500 signatories. And the reason also is that there are very few women willing to put their face and their name out to actively champion the declaration and to risk either their social capital or their jobs and so many other things, including, their personal life as well. Now, to just bring things in context, of course, India is very populous. Of course, there are so many different languages in the country, but there are also several other ways in which the country is divided, particularly in the name of caste and in the name of religion. Now, it is impossible for women to come together as one unit when we have disturbing differences in the form of caste. There are hierarchical socio-political structures in this country that makes it impossible for my sister belonging to the caste in the bottom of the pyramid to even trust me in the first place as her own, that we can in fact hold arms together and fight this as one unit. It is impossible to garner that trust. for obvious reasons, because of historical years and years of subjugation that they have felt in the hands of women belonging and men belonging to the oppressing caste. There are differences in the name of religion. People don't get along with each other. There are all forms of communal violences, and it's ravaged by all sorts of unspeakable violence in the name of religion. Women still don't have legal rights, even though there are laws on paper in theory, but there are many things that women still can't achieve. And the term sex-based rights is unheard of, because the Supreme Court of India, as well as all the legal documents, constantly use sex and gender interchangeably, to the point that we recently had the same-sex marriage petition, where the Chief Justice of India heard petitions from several lawyers where they were making cases for legalizing same-sex marriage. First of all, they just decided to rename it as marriage equality petition rather than same-sex marriage petition. That in itself was a big blow and hugely homophobic. The Chief Justice of India, along with his bench, took his time and decided that they will disallow same-sex marriage in my country. It was only decriminalized in 2018, that is 5 years ago. So what the Chief Justice of India also said was that male and female are not absolute concepts. He is extremely woke himself. Though they disallowed it, what they have done, something so far more egregious, is that they have allowed transgender heterosexual marriages, which means if you self-identify as transgender and you marry somebody, according to them, of the opposite sex, that becomes a straight marriage. Now you can imagine the number of lesbians that are going to line up to sign up for this. So there is an ongoing problem of this interchangeable use of sex and gender. I hope that with the successes that sisters are experiencing in different countries, that WDI's declaration becomes far more mainstream, in a way that I will be able to cite that as an example to say that these are all the successes that my sisters have achieved elsewhere. Therefore, these are the things that you need to take into consideration. We are, like I said, we are not in the active resistance stage yet, but I hope as more and more people see the changes that are happening worldwide, will come forward and be willing to speak, will be willing to organize with me, will be willing to speak out against their organization or their school or their college. Mothers will be able to speak against the indoctrination that the children are facing, where they are being taught that boys and girls are not concepts, and introducing puberty blockers to them and things like that. I hope the tide will change when the tide changes elsewhere, but at this moment, it is still very, very grim. What I want to leave you with is that my hope is, earlier, before I got in touch with WDI and decided to be the country contact, it felt rather lonely. But now when I write a petition or send a letter to these ministries or these political policy makers and things like that, I write as WDI India, and that feels immensely powerful. I can't tell you sometimes the strength it gives me when I write a letter to a policymaker as WDI India and not just as Vaishnavi Sundar, because it feels like there is an army of women behind me, though they are not there right now, not in India yet. But I would like to think that they're there all over the world. So to me, success would seem like that tide will change in India as well. Thank you. Please don't think that I am somehow bringing down the energy in any sense. Trust me, I am geared up 24/7. I'm not just feeling sorry about the state of affairs or anything like that. I am here because I'm angry. I want to do something to change it. And that's why I'm here. That's why, even though the response has been so lukewarm at best, I don't think that it is a setback, and I want to keep progressing further. And that's why I jokingly said to somebody, all this energy that I'm getting in a room like this, I store it as some sort of a reservoir, so that back home when I dock myself in front of my editing computer and I'm hit with all of these horrible news that's coming out in India, I take a piece of my experience today to remind myself that, it's okay. Things are bad right now, but things will get better. It is how it was in that country, but they fought it. And that's where they are right now. So I don't want you to think that I am just constantly painting this really grim picture. But I also would like you to keep in mind that things are indeed really bad, and there is no harm in saying that. It might be all nice to, be at a feminist conference and say, smash the patriarchy and, if to hell with patriarchy and all of that. But the reality is grim. And when we are divided in ways that there seems to be no way to glue us all together in a country like mine, it is really worrying for me to think about what the best course of action is. It's what keeps me awake at night. What do I do? What can I do? We've translated the declaration in 2 Indian languages, and that's not enough. How do I get them to read it? And when I was translating, I had to come up with phrases to explain a word because we don't have it in our vocabulary. We languages are sex-based by default. So when we are talking about pronouns and other things, these are such alien concepts to most Indian women, ordinary Indian women. But to say that this in 5 years' time is going to affect her, despite her ignorance, is the reality. So it's nice to keep in mind that our successes are motivating us, yes, but we should also keep in mind that there are countries for whom it's a long way away. Even though they're constantly fighting, it is a long way away.
So one thing I think success would look like is this logo. I would like this logo to be as recognizable globally as women's sex-based rights, as any other of these international logos. And we've just produced these, and they're iron-on, and I ironed them onto my shirt. And you not only are they iron-on and then they start to peel off, apparently, you should try to sew them on, and they're good because you can put them on top of a bad logo. So for instance, Bud Light, if you have a t-shirt with Bud Light on it, you can put this on to cover over your Bud Light t-shirt. So that's a positive thing. But I do think it's a very good logo, and it's if it was recognizable, that would be quite useful. So in thinking about this, I think a lot of women and men in this struggle against gender identity ideology were forced into the fight sometime around 2015 by realizing that their rights were under threat. So they seem to be, in a way, wanting to go back to the good old days of 2015. That's the sort of implicit narrative that many of our co-fighters, our combatants are coming up with. They say that, well, they want to retain women-only toilets, sleeping accommodation, changing rooms for places women are undressed or vulnerable. They want to speak their minds freely without cancellation, freedom of speech. They want female-only sports, women's prizes to be won by women, and want women to speak for women. But it's unclear where they want to go. And almost everybody in this fight with us says they've got no idea where it came from. They were happily living their lives. They weren't feminists. They weren't worried about everything. Everything was great. And then something happened around 2015, and they want their life back. They want to go back. Now, that's absolutely not the case for us, radical feminists, and the more, I guess, everybody in WDI, certainly me. We come from a tradition where we saw this coming. We knew it was coming. Janice Raymond writing The Transsexual Empire in 1979, was it? Which we read, many of us read very shortly after that. So we saw it coming. Mary Daly writing gynecology in 1984, I think it was, or around that time, outlines very clearly the history of the medical profession problematizing female bodies and minds and mutilating us and adult women. And then Sheila Jeffries continuing that tradition of razor sharp understanding from a radical feminist perspective, has been writing in a series of books and participating in the struggle against that what now is called gender identity ideology. So we come from a very special place. We're a unique organization. And I think for us, success is not just to go back to 2015 and to those nice lives in professions that people had made their peace with. They were happy with the simmering level of misogyny that was going on in 2014. We were utterly not happy with it, and we want to fight this fight, but we don't want to go back to that. Now, one of the things is there's a huge coalition of people we are fighting with, so we do want to fight with them, but we want something different. Now, what WDI, I think one of the clear things that we have stated and we're working on, like Amparo said, is we want the implementation of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. It's based on CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and UNDEVW, which is the United Nations Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women. Now, we want all states and international institutions to implement all of those United Nations declarations. Most of the nations in the world, or the states in the world, have signed CEDAW and should be powering ahead on implementing that. I mean, CEDAW is in no way implemented. There's so much work to be done on simple women's sex-based rights. So, and the fact that they're being undermined now is a total disaster. So I'd say another form of success, we don't want any use of the term gender in any cases to muddle up. That would just clear everything up. As Sheila just said, abolition of gender. So that brings us on to the question, do we really think that the UN, the United Nations, is a body that we should be aiming at? Should we be lobbying the UN? Should we be asking the UN, demanding the UN that they should do these things we want, get rid of the term gender, etc.? Should this be a place that we are engaging with? And I think we should, and I think that we, as WDI, it is a good idea for us to be doing actions towards the United Nations. One of the reasons is that our declaration is based upon the fact that is based upon CEDAW, and that has been signed by 159 governments worldwide. And although the United Nations is imperfect, it has done a lot of good things, and it is redeemable, or it is a possible area for change. I think given the huge crises that are happening now in the world, with the climate catastrophe, more wars, lack of resources, meaning there's going to be even more wars, and the far or the right wing sort of aim to move us away from even the concept of human rights or the concept of internationalism. And I think that, personally, I think that it is a good thing that we have got this commitment to reminding people about CEDAW and international sisterhood, but internationalism. So I would say we should rework or continue to do the work towards the United Nations. Now, on the negative side, we know that the UN is, or we do, I don't know if everybody knows this, but it's a lot of people think that the UN has been a tool to promote Western ideas, norms. It often has done more harm than good. So it is, and it is also, parts of it are promoting gender identity ideology. They're working closely with international NGOs like Save the Children, Médecins Sans Frontières, and Oxfam, all of whom are promoting gender identity ideology. But I think that it is a good thing for us to be doing anyway, to be working related to the United Nations. Now, in order for WDI to do some of this work, we have been working to some extent on various things. One is the fantastic book that has been written that Amparo has mentioned, Women's Rights, Gender Wrongs. And hopefully not only will we really promote that book, which is a significant achievement, but it's really useful document to show the situation globally. Hopefully more books will come out along those lines, getting from Kath Aiken and Sally Wainwright, but more of those books will look, that will be success in my mind. As another thing is, we've talked about, but not yet done, the idea of having an online survey to monitor and publish data on which countries have ratified CEDAW. That's easy, we know that. Signed UNDEVW, and which have undermined sex-based rights by implementing gender identity ideology. So creating law to make it possible to say men or women, instituting hate speech laws to punish people who contest the gender identity ideology, and altering their own laws to implement gender identity ideology. I think that's something that, given our reach and our website, it would be a successful thing to do, and it'd be very useful, and it would help also us sharing information. That's something we would really do. Not only should we, in my mind, we would be successful if we did those things, but I think we also want to nurture the international women's movement. So there's an idea that top-down influencing government, getting laws changed is one way of doing it, but there is also the incredibly important work of sisterhood is powerful, of taking our eyes off the guys, of creating international sisterhood, which, with the opportunity of Zoom and networking, internationalism, we've been reasonably successful at doing. We've created some really strong international links, and I think that that is success, and particularly at the moment, with the United Nations not providing a place where the international women's movement can meet. They've closed that off by that. We are not allowed to even be at the side events in New York because we make people feel unsafe by our ideas and by continually promoting the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. So, but we have gone outside we're working on our own internationally, and I think that is a really big success, and I think we should do that. So I would also, just putting some sort of facts on, I think that it would be great if we had country contacts in every country, and we raise money to pay staff to facilitate this international work that we're doing. It's a crucial part of the fight against gender identity ideology, which is global and is being implemented. We heard from Linda Hart, who about how it's going in Finland. It's the same thing in almost every country. It's playing out. We've heard from lots of people. So I think that we do have a justifiable need, or it would be, we could play a very good role in international networking and fighting that. So I think we should try to get paid staff to promote the declaration and get country contacts in every country. Apart from those things, I think our weekly webinars, Feminist Question Time, which we're at right now, and Radical Feminist Perspectives are key parts of our work. The Feminist Question Time has meant that we have been able to hear from women from many countries. I don't know how many, but we know it's many. We also get attendees from all over the world who come along, and we hear about women who say, I thought I was the only person, I'm the only person I know in my country who worries about this, but I feel now linked up with other people by coming to Feminist Question Time. Now, Radical Feminist Perspectives is a key part of our work, in my view, and I think other people's, is in that we are bringing back to life many of the knowledge. We're sort of keeping alive feminist literature and ideas and rejuvenating it, reminding people so that those things are not lost, and we can educate new young women or women new to this and continue our ideas. And I've always thought that this term TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminists, which is everybody's accused of being a TERF if they don't go along with this, is actually really fantastic, because I say it's a portal. So the term, it's a portal, and we, WDI, are here to welcome people in. So the moment they get called a TERF, they quickly go online, they go, what's a TERF? What's a radical feminist? And I think we should be right at the heart of what radical feminism is, and be there and say, yes, we are radical feminists, come on in, and make sure that we are there. And I think, well, one of my feelings is we should let this attack on women, we should use the attack on women to do a patriarchy beating riposte. So I feel that they attacked us, and they're going to rue the day when they attacked us, because our riposte is going to just go so much further than 2015. We're going to go to post-patriarchy, Herland, or whatever, Mitchfest, or 24/7. And oh yes, and my last thing I would like to say is this, that of course we're going somewhere, but I think success is now. Us being here now in the webinar, everybody online, us being here is a success. We are in a meta-patriarchal space. We've created international sisterhood, and just the very doing of it, the actual now of today, is incredibly special that we've done it. So if this is all we've done, I think it's a massive success, but let's do it lots more times.